What is up, lovely people from the internet, and happy new year everyone! Now that a new year of VR development awaits us, I wanted to make this video to tell you about the changes you can expect from this year to make a VR game in 2021. And this video will be the opportunity to update a bit my tutorial on how to make a VR game using the Unity XR Toolkit for the year to come. So if you haven't already, go watch at least the first episode of this tutorial series before pursuing with this video to know what I'm talking about. And I will start off with the good news. The tutorial series is still working in its entirety and you can still follow every step to make your own VR game, but two main things have happened since: the new input system and the Open VR support. And we will start with the latest. So, if you recall, Unity has two ways of enabling VR for your game. The old version for version 2019.4 and below, which you can set up by going to Edit, Project Settings, Player, enabling the VR supported device box, and then adding which SDK you want in the list over there. So Oculus for Oculus devices and OpenXR for OpenXR devices, such as the Valve Index or the HTC Vive. Now for the second method, which is the new one that only works for version 2019.4 and above, which you can enable by going to project setting as well, but then instead of player setting, you need to go to XR plugin management. There we can click on install XR plugin management package, and there, in the same way as the old method, you can add or remove a SDK to target a particular device. Oh, and obviously you need to choose one or the other. You cannot use both methods in the same application. But ever since its release, the issue with the new version is that it didn't support OpenXR devices like the Valve Index or the HTC Vive, which meant that if you wanted to make it work for these headsets, you needed to stick to Unity 2019.4 and use the old setup. But now this issue is no more, as Unity has added in the new version 2020.2 the Open VR support, which is the version I'm currently using right now on this Unity project. Now the OpenXR support doesn't appear here for now as it's in preview, so in the future it should be added to the list with the other, but in the meantime, to add it, you can simply go to Package Manager, then enable Preview Packages here by clicking on the Setting button, Advanced Project Settings, and then enable preview packages and click on I understand that these packages are full of bugs right now. And now if we close this window and that we select here Unity registry, we are able to see all the packages from Unity with the preview packages as well. And we can finally navigate to OpenXR plugin and click on install. Perfect, now that it is downloaded, we can close the package manager, and as you can see, if we go back to the XR plugin management, we can see the OpenXR plugin hanging out with the other SDK. Nice! And now we can make our VR game work with this device by enable it here. Perfect. Now, as you can see, we have an error panel next to OpenXR, and if we click on it, we can see a bunch of stuff that the SDK doesn't like about our project settings, which I think is a really good thing Unity did. So to fix this, we can simply click on the Fix All button. And don't worry, if it closes and reopen your project, it's fine. And there you go, now we have enabled OpenXR on our project. Good job. Now it is noteworthy that with the new XR management system, the parameters for each setup is available down here. For example, if you want to use the stereo rendering mode of Oculus to single pass, which make things a bit more optimized, you can do it here, but in my case I will leave it to multi-pass. And for OpenXR we got a bit the same with, again, some additional parameters in features, and as you can see here, we can actually say which controller device we want, so what kind of device input we want to listen. In my case, I think I will enable all, so the HTC Vive, Microsoft, Oculus Touch, and Valve Index. Okay, and there you go. Now that concludes the first big change that I wanted to cover here in this video. Now keep in mind that as stated by Unity themselves, this is just a preview package for now, which can cause some weird behavior on your game. So if you don't need to use the latest Unity version for your game, the wiser thing you can do is stick to Unity 2019.4 and use the old setup for XR management. So now there is another important thing to know about the OpenXR plugin is that, as mentioned again by Unity, because OpenXR only supports action-based input, Unity's OpenXR plugin makes exclusive use of our new input system. So to resume, if you are using the OpenXR plugin, you need to use the action-based input system as well. But what is this action-based input system and why does it matter? And this is the perfect transition for this video because that is the second big change that I wanted to talk about in this video. So, what is the action-based input system? If you've already worked with Unity, you should be familiar with the traditional input system. Now, the old input system works fine, but lacks an important stuff when trying to work with multiple devices. And this is why Unity has introduced lately a new system called the action-based input system, and you will see why in a minute. But what interests us as a VR developer is that with the Unity XR Toolkit, we can now create a XR rig that supports this new input system, which is a really great news. And this is what I will show you how to do right now. So I'm in an empty Unity project right now that has already been VR enabled. You can use the old or the new XR setup. For this, it doesn't matter. And now I want to create a VR rig to play my game. So first I'm going to download the Unity XR Toolkit. So let's go to the package manager, make sure that the preview package are showing in the setting like we did earlier. And now download the new version of the Unity XR Toolkit. Here you go, now it is downloaded. Now, before continuing, let's see what kind of input system we are currently using, the old or the new one. For this, I'm going to go to the project settings, then in player tab, and then in other settings, all below, as you can see, we have active input handling. And in my case, it is set to new, and this is because when I was installing OpenXR, one of the errors that pop up was this one asking me to set the input system to new. So yes, before continuing, if you want to use the new input system, make sure it is set over there, or you can even set it to both to make the input of your game work with both the new and the old input system. Okay, now next, let's make a XR rig that use the new input system. For this, we can right-click in the hierarchy, go to XR, and as you can see, we can directly set up a bunch of elements from the XR Toolkit here. For example, if we go to device base, you can see the room scale XR rig that I made in my Unity XR Toolkit tutorial series and that use the old input system. But now for the new one, you need to go back and then select the room scale XR rig / action based. And there you go, as you can see, this creates an XR rig with a camera offset and array on each end. Obviously, you can modify this rig like we did in my tutorial series, but this time we have a big change. Instead of having XR controller, now these controllers are action-based and not device-based, which means that the code is using the new input system. But unfortunately, we are not done. As you can see, all the references for the XR controller are empty right now, and we could set it up on our own, but it would take us a lot of time. A smarter thing to do is use the default input action that Unity has made for us. To add them, we can go back to the package manager, click on the XR interaction toolkit, and there we will find in the sample the default input action that we can download by clicking on import. Okay, and as you can see, the actions are available now in our project files. We have one for continuous movement, one for continuous turn, for the snap turn, and for the left and right controller, which is the one we want. Now, before having a look at these assets and showing you actually how the new input system works, let's finish the setup of our rig by assigning these input action to it. To do so, we can click on the left controller and at the top here, click on Add to Action Base Controller Default. We can do the same now for the right controller. By doing this, we've actually added these two in our preset that we can find in Edit, Project Setting, Preset Manager. And now what's left for us to do is write right for the right controller and left for the left controller to determine which one is for who. Here you go. Now, as you can see, this has not changed our XR rig yet, but now if we delete it and recreate one, we have correctly set up the XR rig, and as you can see now, all action have filled the XR controller. Perfect. And there you go, now the setup is completed. You've succeeded to create an XR rig that uses the new input system. Congratulations. Now, one last important thing. The final step for this setup is to actually enable the input action used by the controller, which you can do with the input action manager script, which you can place anywhere in your scene. For example, I think I will attach it to the parent of the XR rig. So let's click on Add Component and search for Input Action Manager. And now we can add on the list the XRI default input actions to be able to listen to these inputs. And from there, things are exactly the same as before. You can create your own script and use the event of the controller to trigger any special behavior that you want, but more on that later. Okay, now that we have set up our XR rig for the new input system, I want to show you how we can modify and tweak the input that we currently have. So as we already have the default input setup, instead here of doing a kind of step-by-step guide to create your own inputs with the new input system, what I'm going to do is actually the opposite. We'll start with the default one and try to understand how it works by reverse engineering it. And by the way, if you want a step-by-step guide on how to create your own action-based input system, there is an awesome video from Brackeys that does a great job at explaining this. Now let's open our inputs. For this, we can navigate to where our default input action is and double-click on it. Perfect. The first thing that we can see here is the 3 action map on the left, for the head, for the left hand and the right hand, and for each action map there is a list of action associated. So for example, for the XRI HMD we have the position and rotation, and for the right and left hand we have the same with a bunch of other action for activate, select, haptic and so on. So as you can see, this has decomposed all of the functionalities of our rig into these actions. And we can use these actions in our script to trigger any behavior that we want. So for example, let's have a look at our XR rig. If we go to the left hand, for example, on our rig, you can see the position action used here to set the position of the object. Same goes for the select action and so on. But now where things get interesting is in the bindings. So let me open once again the input action. And now for all action that you can see, we have a binding which tells to what button is the action bind to. For example, to select with the left hand, we have the grip pressed binding, but if you want it, you could change that to another input by clicking on pass and then choosing a binding. And if you are looking for a button on an XR device, you can actually go to XR controller left hand, optional control, and here select any of the button that you want. But where things are getting interesting is that you can use multiple binding for the same action. So to debug, if I wanted to trigger the select with a space key, I could click on the plus button over there, add bindings, search for space and select the space key. And this is something that I've actually talked about in my last video on how to make a VR game without a VR headset, where these additional bindings are used to control the VR headset using keys. And this way you can also use additional bindings to trigger behavior on different devices that you can see here, and simply to get things a bit more organized as well. And still, it is really simple to access this input to trigger the behavior that you want. So to conclude this video, let me show you quickly how it looks like. If we go to the left hand, for example, I'm going to add a new script called test action controller input. Now, all we need to do is access the action. We could create a public action variable here, but as all our actions are linked in the action controller, what I'm going to do instead is get a reference to this controller by adding first at the top here using Unity engine.xr.interaction.toolkit at the top. Then adding a private reference for action-based controller called controller that we can access at the start of the game with a get component of type action-based controller. And now we can have access to all of our actions. For example, for the select action, we can do controller.selectAction.action. And now, as you can see, we can do anything we want with this action. For example, I can get the value with .read value bool. Here we write bool because we activate or not, but we could use float to have the amount the button is pressed. And I can store this value in a variable, for example, bool is pressed, that we could use later in our script or in an update function. Or another easy way is to actually trigger a function when this button is performed. That you can do with controller.selectAction.action.perform, and if you write plus equals and then press on tab 2 times, it will auto-complete the code and create a function for you. And if you are not familiar with this syntax, we are basically telling Unity to add this function to the list of the function that needs to be called when this action is performed. And now instead of throwing an error here, I can write select button is pressed in the debug console. And there you go. If I click on play, as you can see, everything is working now. And that wraps up this short but intense lookup at the new input system for VR with the Unity XR Toolkit. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this first video of the year and are excited as I am for these new changes. As always, thank you for watching till the end, and if you could click on that like and subscribe button, you would be an awesome human being. A big shout out to my new Patreon who appear on the screen right now, and without you I wouldn't be able to do this kind of video. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Bye bye!